Last Halloween, my dorm mate Lauren forced me to go with her to a party at one of her sorority houses. She knew that Greek party stuff wasn't really my thing, but she wouldn't take no for an answer. We got a late start, mostly because Lauren kept changing her outfit. Then we started to walk across the long campus. I was surprised at how quiet and empty it was. For most of our walk, we didn't see anyone. We reached the arts building and just passed the quad. There was a woman in a white dress standing on the stairs, nervously looking around. Then, out of nowhere, a man in a black mask came up behind her and stabbed her with a knife. At least, I think it was a knife. We were too far away. She collapsed onto the steps and he stabbed her again. She let out a piercing help. Without thinking, I started running towards the commotion. Lauren grabbed my arm to stop me. I tried to reason with her, but she said it's not real. They're just doing a performance art. She had a point. Students in our school arts program always did bizarre stunts at the end of the semester. Last year, a group of them disrupted our final exams with a massive flash mob across the campus. The semester before that, they hid bags of fake money throughout the quads and filmed their reactions. If you ask me, I didn't like these stunts, as I didn't think of them as performances at all. They were just pranks. But none of the pranks were like this. This was a murder scene. It didn't look fake at all. The poor woman was screaming bloody murder, and even though she was pretty far, I could see blood dripping down the stairs. Blood definitely looking real. I should have pulled out of Lauren's grasp. I should have run to the woman, but without Lauren's support, I didn't have the confidence to do it alone. Eventually, I gave in and we both left. Once we got to the Halloween party, I couldn't enjoy myself. I kept thinking about that woman. Lauren immediately left to go hook up with some guy that I didn't know. I tried to have a good time, but after about an hour, I gave up and went back home. I didn't even tell Lauren I was leaving. On my long walk back home, I was pretty nervous. The campus seemed completely empty. As I walked, I looked around every shadow, worried that the killer might come back. But when I walked past the arts building again, I couldn't find any signs of murder. No blood, no body, nothing. Somehow that just made my paranoia worse. I got back to my dorms and turned on the lights. It would have helped if there were other people in the dorms, but the building was just empty. By the middle of the night, I heard someone moaning softly in the hallway. I peered through the peephole in my door, and I saw the murdered woman. Still covered with blood. Even though she couldn't see me through the peephole, somehow I knew that we were looking directly at each other. She reached towards the door with her bloody hands. Why didn't you save me? I frantically unlocked the door, but when I opened it, she was gone. The next morning, I convinced myself that it was just a dream, that no one got murdered, no one was haunting me. But then the next night, she came back. This time, Lauren was in the dorm with me. She was watching something on her computer. The same moaning came from the hallway. I raced to the door and looked outside. Once again, the woman was there, reaching towards with her same bloody hands and the same horrible question. Why didn't you save me? I asked Lauren if she heard it too, but she was wearing ear pods and couldn't hear anything. I had to physically shake her shoulders to get her attention. That dead woman is back, I told her. But when she went to see for herself, the ghost woman had disappeared. Very funny, Lauren said, thinking I was messing with her. You're worse than those art students. I explained everything to her, about seeing her last night too, but she wasn't convinced. We argued about it, but Lauren started teasing me about believing in ghosts. She said she would only believe if she saw the ghost for herself. No one else was in our dorm. No one else saw what we saw. And believe me, I asked everyone. I checked the local news too. No one had gone missing. The only news I found for Halloween night involved drunk and disorderly frat guys. For the next week, I saw the bloody woman 3 more times, just outside my dorm room, and twice on my walk across campus. All 3 times, she was bloody and desperate. All 3 times, no one else saw her. I began to lose hope that I'd get any answers. Deep down, I figured all these sightings were just manifestations of my guilt. I saw a murder and I didn't stop it. Whether or not the murder was real, my guilt certainly was. The most frustrating part about this whole thing was that Lauren, who literally had seen the stabbing with me, didn't believe me at all. Every time I brought it up, she told me the murder was fake and ghosts weren't real. As someone who never believed in the supernatural before, it was hard for me to argue. Then, one night, 1 week after Halloween, I saw the ghost woman one last time. She was back in the dorm hallway, scratching on my door and moaning the same accusation. Lauren was in her bedroom, but I knew that if I ran to get her, the ghost would disappear once more. I opened the door and finally, I could see the ghost face to face. She wasn't translucent or anything. She looked like a real person covered in blood. "I'm so sorry," I told her. "I should have saved you." The ghost seemed surprised for a second, especially to how fast I pushed open the door. She involuntarily stepped backwards, though her hands were still outstretched. "What do you want?" I asked. "How can I help you cross over?" She backed up even further, the look of confusion on her ghostly face. She didn't know what to say. "It's okay," I told the ghost as calmly as I could. "Tell me what you want." She backed up just one more step, but unfortunately too far. The stairs were right behind her. She overstepped just a couple inches, slipping off the top of the stairs and fell backwards. I watched in horror as she fell down the flight of stairs and landed in a heap next to the floor. Her body made an awful crunch as it struck every step on the way down. A trickle of blood oozed out of her mouth, but it was a different color from the bloodstains on her shirt. She looked up at me, unable to move her head. Slowly, she mumbled out her dying words. It was just performance art. For Halloween, my boyfriend Steven took me to a fortune teller for the first time. I'd always been curious about these sort of things, but I didn't want to waste money on it. The only reason I agreed to go with him was because he'd gotten a coupon in the mail. We went to a tiny building that I never noticed before. Its sign said Madame Zara, Psychic Readings and Mystical Memorabilia, with a little lightning bolt logo. When we entered, an old woman with too much makeup on greeted us. She looked like someone who would call herself Madame Zara. Her real name was probably Jennifer or something. She guided us towards a circular table where she kept her crystal ball. She handed her the coupon, and then she started the reading. She gave us some generic predictions, nothing too interesting, and then she froze. Her eyes widened as if she was seeing some horrible vision. It was obviously a performance, but she was pretty believable. "What did you see?" Stephen asked with genuine nervousness. "I see a sword with a red handle," she said. "One of you will murder the other with that sword." What a load of crap. I looked at Stephen, and his eyes were wide with fear. Then he forced himself to laugh and said, "Yeah, I doubt that." He acted like he didn't believe it, but I knew my boyfriend well enough to know that the prediction unnerved him. Madame Zara continued with our reading, but she kept stopping herself to warn us about that sword. Its image kept interrupting all her other visions. Well, that's what she said anyway. When she was done, Stephen gave her a big tip and we left. On the drive back home, we all joked about this experience. He said that he didn't believe a word, but I knew that wasn't true. Back home, we sat on our porch and handed out candy to trick-or-treaters. We'd done the same thing last year, and it was a total blast. This time, Stephen seemed really distracted. It wasn't fun anymore. I eventually gave up and went back inside without him. To keep myself busy, I took out the trash. While I was tying up the bag, I noticed some cardboard in the rest of the trash. It was a torn-up remnant of a delivery box, a long, sword-shaped delivery box. Stephen's nervous reaction to the fortune teller suddenly would make sense. He had a sword delivered here, might even have a red handle as well. Why did he buy a weapon without telling me? What if Madame Zara was right about the sword? Then that mean that maybe she was right about Stephen killing me with it. I knew I might have been overreacting, but I couldn't risk it. I grabbed the box as evidence and hurried towards the side door. I planned to sneak around the side of the house and get to my car before Stephen could see me. I tried to be as quiet as I could. I got to the side yard, and I could see my car directly in front of me. But before I could reach it, Stephen called my name. I stupidly turned around. He stood on the porch, holding a red-handled sword against his chest. I can explain. I didn't give him the chance. I jumped in my car and sped off. He chased after my car for a while, but once I turned onto the main road outside the neighborhood, I lost him. I couldn't go to the police. They would just think I was crazy. No crime had been committed yet, and any cop in our small town would just doubt it. I could have gone straight to my sister's, but I didn't want my sister in any kind of danger either. The only option I had was to go back to the fortune teller. I parked in front of her shop, the sign shining above me. I looked at the lightning bolt logo, and I recognized it from somewhere else. I looked back down at the torn-up cardboard box. The return address had the same lightning bolt logo. That could mean only one thing. Madame Zara was scamming us. From what I could tell, her company had sold Stephen that sword, then sent him the coupon for a psychic reading, where she pretended to see the sword in her vision. The only thing I didn't understand was her end goal. Why would she start to manipulate me into suspecting my boyfriend of murder? I had to find out. I pushed my way inside. Madame Zara was sitting at her table, scrolling through her phone. She jumped at my sudden arrival. I was about to tell her what I discovered, but I figured it would be better to trick the truth out of her. So I made myself look extra panicked and I screamed, "You were right. My boyfriend was going to kill me with that sword, so I murdered him first. And now I don't know what to do." That was obviously a lie, but it had the desired effect. Madame Zara was panicked. "You killed him?" "Yes," I lied. "Like you predicted. Please help me. I don't want to go to jail." "You need to call the police," she told me. "I can't. I killed him." With that, Madame Zara finally confessed. All she wanted was to get customers. She'd used her mystical memorabilia business to get information, and when we came in, she made up her visions to manipulate and distrust each other. The goal was to trick us into believing that we'd come back for more readings, but she never wanted things to escalate the way that they did. Except they didn't escalate. I really didn't kill my boyfriend. Now I knew the truth, and I told her that I was going straight to the police to turn myself in, and I'd tell them how she manipulated me into killing him. That made her really nervous. She begged me to reconsider. I told her I would keep her secret if, maybe, this fake psychic would give me $1,000 to keep quiet. She even had an NDA ready to sign, which I happily did. Cash in hand, I went back home. Stephen explained that he bought the sword because he thought it was cool. He was a little embarrassed by it, though, especially since it was so expensive. He explained that he was going to tell me about it eventually, but our psychic reading was just an escalation of things. We never had another psychic reading again. The red-handed sword is proudly displayed on our wall, and honestly, Stephen was right. It is pretty cool. Martin and I divorced last August. We'd been married for a year, but it just wasn't working out. I still loved him, but I could no longer look past his flaws. He was a slacker. He never took anything seriously. I thought that as we got older, he'd start to mature. He'd get a better job, do more of the cooking, pick up after himself. You know, basic stuff that you would expect from a husband. But nope. He was the same lazy goofball that he'd been in college. I didn't see him as the kind of person I could eventually raise children with. So I asked for a separation. We lived apart for a couple months, and hopefully he'd get his act together. I didn't tell him exactly what I wanted from him. He needed to figure that out by himself. By the time Halloween rolled around, we'd been living apart for 3 months. During that time, he hadn't contacted me once. At times, it was nice to have the house to myself, but for Halloween night, I really wanted him there with me. I was home alone, passing out candy to trick-or-treaters. Most of the neighborhood kids were super cute, but it wasn't fun without Martin beside me. He loved Halloween more than any other holiday, and even though his childishness usually annoyed me, Halloween was the one time of year that I really missed that part of him. Eventually, the trick-or-treaters stopped coming. I started picking up all my leftover candies when one last trick-or-treater knocked on my door. He was dressed in an expensive-looking pirate costume. He wasn't a kid, though. He looked older than me. He even had stubble on his chin. No one that old should be going door to door asking for candy. "Trick or treat," he said in a deep voice. I asked him how old he was, and he just repeated, "Trick or treat." I should have just given him the candy, but I didn't. I told him that he was too old and then closed the door on him. He didn't say anything, and when I looked through the peephole, he was silently leaving my porch with his head lowered in embarrassment. Once he was gone, I shut off the porch light and deadbolted the door. Halloween was officially over. I started watching some dumb horror movie on TV, wondering what Martin was doing for the holiday. Suddenly, the TV shut off by itself, and all the lights went out too. I looked out the window and saw that the house across the street had all their lights still on. This wasn't a blackout. Someone might have messed with my fuse box. Obviously, it could have been a prank, but I immediately thought about the pirate. I didn't know for sure, but I assumed that he was trying to get back at me for sending him away without candy. Any full-grown adult man who goes trick-or-treating by himself would be capable of something like that. The fuse box was outside my garage, and if a man was still out there, I didn't want to go outside. And also, I didn't want to sit in complete darkness while some creep was wandering around. So what should I do? I decided to call the police, but I couldn't find my phone in my pocket. I must have left it somewhere near the front door, but it was too dark for me to find it. Slowly, fear began to set in. I wished Martin was here. For the first time since our separation, I really, truly needed him. A loud, shattering sound rose up behind me. Someone had thrown one of my decorative rocks through the window, shooting shards of glass everywhere. I jumped off my feet. There was a man outside the broken window looking right at me. I couldn't see his face, though. "I'm calling the police," I shouted, even though it was a lie. If only I could find my phone. The man disappeared from the window. There was silence for a long moment. All I heard was my heartbeat. And wham! Another rock hurled through my front window. This time I was close enough to feel shards of glass pelt my shoulder. I could deal with that later, but right now, I had to get out of the house. Fast. I ran to my back door and flung it open. I looked both ways, trying to catch a glimpse of my attacker, and decided to go right. There were fewer trees on that side, so I'd have a straight shot to the road. I rounded the corner and tripped over something, landing hard on both of my hands. My left wrist made a horrible snapping noise, though I didn't feel any pain. I think my adrenaline was pumping too hard. I scrambled to my feet and saw exactly what I tripped over. It was that pirate laying dead on the ground. A bloody rock sat next to his cratered head, barely able to breathe. I stumbled backwards, colliding against another man standing right behind me. He grabbed me by the shoulders and spun me around to face him. "Martin?" He wrapped me in a big hug and asked if I was okay. I felt so safe in his arms, until the realization hit me. "You killed him," as I said as I pushed him back. He didn't deny it. He explained that he'd seen the guy sneaking through my yard and breaking my windows, so he sprang into action. He made it sound like he was this big hero who'd come to rescue me. And in a way, he was. He murdered this man for me. I spat onto the ground and ran away from him. He saved my life, so I wasn't going to tell the police. But I also wouldn't get back together with him. He scared me now. The next morning, the body was gone, and I never saw Martin again. Our separation had become permanent.
I'm a simple man. I've always desired to live a simple life as a free man and as a prisoner behind these bars. I have received as a reward for my simple life quite an unremarkable existence. It's all that anybody in my position would ask for. I was born 20 years ago in a small town with roads that had no streets and houses that had no numbers. My family was poor, but we had enough for sustenance. We were all we had at the time: my mother, my father, my brother Daniel, and I, David. My father worked in construction, and my mother tended to the homestead because I could not be left alone as a child. You must understand that my living conditions are quite unique. Some would say special. But I didn't let my Down syndrome affect my perspective in the matters that I can control. I was playful as a child, and I enjoyed the humor of my family every chance I got to spend with them. I had a good childhood with the love of family until my father died when I was smaller. It fell to my mother to take care of Daniel and I, while providing the same care as she would have, and I feared that her poor heart could not maintain the pressure. So she died a few years later, leaving Daniel and I to ourselves. Daniel cared for me, and I almost never lacked for anything. He was a good brother, the best brother I could have asked for. He never left my side, and he always made sure that I was in good spirits for all those years. Daniel was the bright one. I remember when I was smaller, he had a chance to go to college in some city far away, and when he asked if he could bring me along, and he was told no, he declined it. He said he would rather stay in town and take care of me than leave me for education in someplace else. I cried myself to sleep that night because I knew Daniel would never leave me, and I was grateful for it. Years passed and I was 21, just as Daniel was 24, and I noticed a beautiful damsel would come around the house for Daniel's company. I liked her presence at first until I noticed she took more and more of Daniel's time the more frequently she came. I didn't like it, and I told Daniel that it hurt me when he spent more time with his new friend than he did with me. He said he liked her, just as much as he liked me, and he would love to marry her. I could not fully reconcile what he meant, but at that point, I started to loathe her. Daniel married Becca after a year of their friendship, and they left for the city without me. It was the first time I was living without my brother in my life, and it was one of the hardest periods I've had to live through. I hated Becca even more as the years passed and Daniel's calls became less frequent. The fact that she had taken my brother from me, with her to the city, was enough to loathe her eternally. It all culminated to one event on a sunny afternoon when the home phone rang and it was Becca on the phone sobbing. I asked her what had happened and she broke down, telling me that Daniel had been in a car crash. I was devastated. Daniel would not have been in a car crash if she had not taken him to the city. I cried and cussed her. I was brimming with so much rage at Becca that I knew I could not control what I felt except I acted on it. So I invited Becca to our home to talk about it. She gave me a date that she would be visiting and I made plans. When the day finally came, I was ready. Becca arrived about 10 minutes early, but it didn't matter much because I had spent days meticulously planning what I would do to her. I saw her stand behind the couch in the living room and I, livid, suffocating on the terrifying thoughts that were in my head. The sheer gore of my imagination had made it difficult for me to sleep, but I hated her enough that I was willing to live through the horror of it. I had a knife behind my back, and it was the only thing I could think of for a first strike. "Hey, David, I'm so sorry," she said when I ushered her into the house, and she stood at the door mewing. "Where is his body?" I asked her, as I marched closer to where she was. The tension of what I was about to do made me dizzy. "I had to make arrangements for a decent burial, David," she replied to me. I noticed the look of slight apprehension in her eyes, but it seemed uncertain, as though she was trying to judge my motive for moving towards her with my hands behind my back. I moved even quicker, desperate to stick the sharp end of my knife in her chest. Without uttering any word to what I had just said, I lunged on her with the knife drawn out, screeching loud. I struck once, aiming at her chest, but Becca's hands knocked my wrist, guiding the blade to her shoulders instead. I was caught up in the feverish frenzy of what I was doing, and in an out-of-body moment of excitement, I was delirious in my quest to murder her. "Ah!" she cried out in horror when my knife sunk into her arm. "Die, Becca, die!" I cried, struggling with the handle of the knife as I tried to snatch the blade out from her shoulders. She resisted me as much as she could and pushed me away. I fell on the floor, just right where I had planted one of the other knives that I had planned to use. I pulled it out, and I saw Becca gasp in horror, her eyes fluttering wide as she turned to flee. She put her hands out, and the second knife stabbed into her open palm. I yelled out in frustration. I hadn't done it before, but I knew stabbing someone in the chest was sure to kill them, and I wanted to kill Becca because she had taken Daniel from me. She took to her heels with one knife on her shoulder, and another knife stuck in her hand. "David, please stop!" she screeched in terror as she ran, horrified out of her mind. I scanned the room for the other places I had tucked knives in because I needed to finish her off. In my distraction, Becca reached the door quickly and was out on the street before I could find a knife. When I chased her out to the street, I saw that she had already alerted the neighbors, who were enough to resist me with placatory words, asking me to not continue with my actions even as they called the cops and an ambulance for Becca, who was bleeding away. Becca made a full recovery with no permanent injuries, and I was arrested with a charge of attempting to murder her. It was 2 years since I had been put behind bars, and I still have nightmares about that moment.